I would request you to kindly mute yourself so that we can avoid disruption. And I, Randhir Kumar Gautam, on behalf of Society for Communal Harmony, welcome you. आप सबों का मैं स्वागत करता हूँ नेशनल वीक कौमी हफ्ता की बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं। नेशनल वीक को हम लोग सत्याग्रह वीक के नाम से भी जानते हैं और सोसाइटी फॉर कम्युनल हार्मनी जो कि कौमी एकता के लिए हमेशा से कार्यरत रही है, तो इस ऐतिहासिक वीक को और भी महत्वपूर्ण तरीके से आयोजन करने का ये प्रयास है। तो सबसे पहले मैं स्वागत करता हूं ऑनरेबल चेयर विजय राव साहब, जो टास्क फोर्स के सोसाइटी फॉर कम्युनल हार्मनी के हेड भी हैं। मैं स्वागत करना चाहता हूं प्रोफेसर आनंद कुमार, जो कि कुछ देर में हमारे साथ जुड़ेंगे, आदरणीय स्पीकर अनिल नौरिया जी का, और सारे लोग जो हमारे साथ फेसबुक से, जूम प्लेटफॉर्म से, यूट्यूब से हमें सुन और देख रहे हैं, उन सबों को मैं तहे दिल से सोसाइटी फॉर कम्युनल हार्मनी की तरफ से स्वागत करना चाहता हूं। आदरणीय स्पीकर और चेयर को आमंत्रित करने से पहले सोसाइटी फॉर कम्युनल हार्मनी का एक संक्षिप्त विवरण मैं आपके समक्ष प्रस्तुत करता हूं। सोसाइटी फॉर कम्युनल हार्मनी सांप्रदायिक सद्भाव समाज का उद्देश्य देश में धार्मिक सद्भाव और सद्भाव के लिए विविध रचनात्मक कार्यों को प्रोत्साहित करना है। हम सत्य, अहिंसा, न्याय, समता के विचार के साथ विश्व बंधुत्व में यकीन रखने वाले सरोकारी स्त्री पुरुष के विचार समाचार के आदान प्रदान के लिए आमंत्रित करते हैं। इस संस्था को बनाने में कई सारे लोकतंत्र के सिपाहियों का भी एक महत्वपूर्ण योगदान रहा है, जिसमें महत्वपूर्ण हस्ताक्षर के रूप में डॉक्टर विश्वम्बरनाथ पांडे, अली मियां अदबी, सादिक अली, सुब्बा राव, अब्दुल मान, कुलदीप नैयर जैसे बहुत महत्वपूर्ण लोकतंत्र के सिपाहियों का एक महत्वपूर्ण योगदान रहा है। प्रोफेसर आनंद कुमार के मार्गदर्शन में ये संस्था बहुत ही सराहनीय प्रयास कर रही है। समय न गवाते हुए मैं आदरणीय चेयर विजय राव साहब को आमंत्रित करता हूं कि वो आज की जो महत्वपूर्ण वार्तालाप है उसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में महत्वपूर्ण बात है। जी,
यहाँ हमारे जुड़े हुए मेहमान साउथ से भी हैं, इसके लिए मैं अंग्रेजी में बोलूँगा और आप सबको तो मालूम होगा, कोई अनुवाद करना है तो बाद में कर सकते हैं। Friends, today is the beginning of the National Week that was celebrated by Gandhiji each year in India to focus on the attention of constructive efforts and uniting the population. The significance of this week has been actually an effort to kind of introspect, reflect, and taking stock of where we are and where we are to go. Therefore, as early as in 1921, Gandhiji leveraged this week to not only share his vision, but to outline a complete detailed plan of action for the nation. Now, the significance of today's topic is extremely critical because India is at the crossroads. This is particularly more relevant because we are at a very critical juncture where the basic tenets of the nation are being shaken. We need to reimagine India, and there can be no better time than this for us to relook and look at the reimagining of India. Today, there's a need for us to revisit the idea of India and of nation building. Nation building is complex because it's a complex web of economic, social, cultural, and other factors, and not pure economics. Gellner defined nationalism as a congruence of power and culture, and addressed the contradictions of mobilizing without a homogeneous power within the country. So, can the present attempt at leveraging the power force cultural ethos on a country successfully without having a homogeneous ecosystem? We need to decide what we want as a nation. World over, many models of communism have been based on communism, where equality of people is theoretically and logically excellent, but have failed. Equally, capitalism based on the trickle-down effect has failed miserably. So, this week we need to really, apart from the historical dimensions of learnings, we need to also seriously consider alternative models, such as what Gandhiji provided or propagated. We need to decide if India should pursue the path of happiness like Sikkim, Norway, where the population is happy, but they are not financial power centers on those kind of things. Or should we perceive material comforts like in United States, Western countries, which excels in material comforts, but the population is stressed and poverty exists in the midst of affluence. That is why vision is very important. What do we, the nation, to progress? What do we want? In this context, I'm laying out a few questions to set as a kind of a background on which I'd like to invite the speaker. Economic wealth creation, employment for its people, opportunities, congenial community where people can help and care for each other, share, respect, love, affection, atmosphere of friendship, and people to feel secure. This is the background that we need for a nation. With this, will the present polarization that's taking place help us? Pitting each other based on numerous false adjectives and false narratives, will that help us create a united front? Will, excuse me, yeah, I'm just coming, 1 second. Sorry. Will majoritarianism help overcome the economic nation building? Can and will investments come if there's violence going on in the streets and unrest everywhere? Will the model of being world power and respect for people not being there, will that help us? If we are world power and we've got all the respect, will it help people in its requirements? What would be the relevance of pursuing only GDP? Things like this. Or should we focus on village? I can go on. But what is the most important is, how do we unshackle the large silent majority who prefer to silently suffer in the country than to stand up and fight for the community? To answer and set this lessons for us, I am really very delighted that to speak on these and political perspectives, we have an eminent and absolutely, it's my honor and pleasure introducing you a very eminent Mr. Anil Nauriya, who is amongst the foremost intellectuals in this country and who has authored a number of books on Gandhiji and on the freedom movement, who is also a Supreme Court senior advocate. His family lineage is even more impressive as its roots are in the freedom fighters, including Mahavir Tyagiji, who was one of the active contributors to the Constituent Assembly and also a cabinet minister after independence. I have no doubts there'll be a number of questions when he finishes. So please do post them in the chat sessions and we'll take them up at the end of the session. May I request Anil Nauriya to please advise us and join us to tell us about the idea of India.
Thank you, VIJAY, for this kind introduction. Let me just correct the record that I'm not author of many books. And secondly, I'm not a senior advocate. I'm an advocate for many years, yes. You might call me a veteran advocate, but I'm not senior. You have rightly put the issues squarely on the Indian future, which is now at the crossroads. And I'm therefore inspired to start with a quotation from Gandhiji, where before the Bardoli Satyagraha was about to start, he had laid down very strict conditions for deciding which area in Gujarat would go in for civil disobedience in 1921-22. And he told the people of Bardoli that Bardoli, before it challenged the might of a great empire, must complete its Swadeshi program to the extent of manufacturing sufficient hand-spun cloth to clothe itself, must freely admit untouchables into the national school, and must be so far non-violent that solitary unarmed cooperators, that is people who are collaborating with the British, and English and other officials might feel absolutely secure in their midst. So just this point that you were making about how the people of India must learn to live in amity with one another, and not only with one another, but with the foreigner as well, because the struggle is against the domination of the foreigner, not against the foreigner as such. Now let me come to today's theme, which is National Week. I'll deal with it in this way, that first I will spend a few minutes on the background leading to the National Week, what later came to be known as National Week, but in 1919, it was the agitation against the Rowlatt legislation. And so I will give a little background on that. Then I will come to the significance of today's date, that is 6th April, and what place it occupied in the struggle. And then talk a little about the events that occurred subsequently in this week that followed, which culminated in the Jallianwala Bagh massacre on the 13th of April 1919 in Amritsar, Punjab, in India. And then I will talk a little about martial law in Punjab. You know, martial law was the day of the day when the Jallianwala Bagh massacre took place. Martial law was not in force. Martial law came on the next day. So I will talk a little about that. And then about the aerial bombing that took place in Gujranwala Gujranwala is now in Pakistan, and Gujranwala was subjected to aerial bombing in parts, and this perhaps was the first aerial bombing by a colonial power in Asia. It was a precursor of what happened in Vietnam and then in Iraq. So I will talk a little about that. And then finally, I will say a few things about the afterlife of nationalism. You know, from 1920 onwards, this period, 6th April to 13th April, came to be observed in India as National Week. And someone has asked for sound to be improved. Shashi Bhai. I don't know if I can be heard. I hope clearly.
Yes, we can hear you, sir. लेकिन अगर आप माइक के पास में आके बोलेंगे थोड़ा और क्लियर होगा. जी.
So I said I will then talk a little about the afterlife of National Week. From 1920 onwards, National Week was observed regularly throughout India. And even after independence, it came to be observed. It was actually, it is, even today, it is part of the, it is mentioned in the flag code of India. And it is recognized officially, but some kind of amnesia has set in, and people have forgotten. So I will come to that. And the significance of National Week, I will talk about, what people have to say about it. And then I will make a few remarks about the ideological basis that is partly responsible for the forgetting. So let me now start with the background. The background was that after the First World War, and you know, in the First World War, India had participated in a big way. The British Secretary of State for India himself admitted that Turkey was defeated in the main by Indian soldiers, by Indian forces. And so there was an expectation in India that India's role in the war and help to Britain and allies would be at least reciprocated in the form of responsible government, which India had been seeking. And, you know, from the days of the foundation of the Indian National Congress in 1885, and thereafter from the days of Dadabhai Nauroji, there had been a great emphasis on Swaraj and the need for responsible government. That was the basis of all of Dadabhai Nauroji's writings on the economic aspect of India and the relation with Britain. And Bal Gangadhar Tilak and so many others had emphasized the need for Swaraj. So there was an expectation in India that now, after the war, there would be serious steps to offer responsible government, if not dominion status, to India. Instead of that came the legislation, which came to be known as the Rowlatt legislation. This was so called after the judge who headed the sedition committee, which had given its report in the previous year, Justice Rowlatt. So these bills came to be popularly known as the Rowlatt bills. And the curious feature of these bills was that they were draconian. they had no provision for pleadings, for defenses, or for appeal. So the popular summary of these laws was na dalil, na vakil, na appeal. There is no pleadings, no defense, excuse me, and no appeal. So there was a great opposition to these bills in India, and even the moderates in political life were totally against this legislation. Many of them resigned from official positions. We'll come to that. So now, on the 21st of March, 1919, the major act, this legislation, that is the Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act, received the Governor General's assent. And then on the 23rd March, Gandhiji gave the call for a hartal, fasting and prayer. First, on the following Sunday, that was later changed to 6th of April. But in Delhi and some other places, it was held on the 30th of March. There were incidents in Delhi for which I will.
Anilji, you need to come closer to the mic. I don't think we followed after March 21st, 1919, what happened.
You didn't follow after 21st March. Okay, 21st March, the Anarchical and Revolutionary Crimes Act received the Governor General's assent. And then on the 23rd of March, Gandhiji gave the call for a hartal, which was held in Delhi on 30th March and in the rest of India on the 6th of April. Now, 6th of April, first of all, in Delhi, when it was held on 30th March, there was firing at the railway station at a mammoth crowd, and some people died. That crowd had approached the railway station for the purpose of getting some people released, some people who had been arrested. So, unfortunately, they were fired at, and the official figure is that 5 people died and some more than 100 were injured. But the actual figures, I have the names, more than 10 people were killed, and we do not really know how many people were injured. But this happened in March. But on the 6th of April was the All India Hartal. And this was a highly successful event. It happened all over India: Bombay, Ahmedabad, Calcutta, Delhi, Bihar, UP towns, Madras, now Chennai, other towns in the Madras Presidency, and so on. On this day, Madan Mohan Malviya also resigned from the Imperial Council. And, in the Northwest Frontier Province, in the protests there, which is now in Pakistan and known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan participated in the protest against the Rowlatt legislation. That is Frontier Gandhi Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. And he was arrested. Not only was he arrested, his 90-year-old father, Behram Khan, he was also arrested. Behram Khan had been a loyalist till then, loyalist of the British, but even he was radicalized by these events, and he too was arrested. It's an irony of fate that now there is a hospital in Haryana which has been sought to be renamed it was called Badshah Khan Hospital, and it is sought to be renamed in the name of a person who was not even born in 1990. So, this is partly the result of ignorance and partly result of malice, I suppose. It may be a combination of the two. But these events certainly shook the Raj. The fact that there were such a successful Hartal in which persons from all religions, all communities, and all classes participated. If one looks at the names of the persons killed, names and professions of the persons killed in Delhi on 30th March, and later on in Jallianwala Bagh a week later, you'll be surprised at the subaltern composition of the people who were involved. Unfortunately, these are things which these academic exercises like subaltern studies and so on did not really focus on. But the fact is that there was an involvement in these protests, which was across classes and across religions. Now, there was violence also at various places, which led Gandhiji to temporarily suspend the civil disobedience, which he had called for. He suspended it temporarily on the 18th of April, after another firing took place in Delhi, on police firing on the 17th of April. So there was a temporary suspension of civil disobedience. Now, to focus first on 6th April, that is today's day, I've already told you that there was a widespread response across the country. In these meetings held in protest against the Rowlatt legislation, there was participation from leading figures in all major cities in India, and the villagers were also involved, to the extent that it really shook up the Raj. And the point about it is that it was a protest on a democratic rights issue. It was a protest on the draconian and arbitrary nature of the Rowlatt legislation. And it was the first protest in India on the first recorded all India protest stretching across the subcontinent on a democratic rights issue. So its significance is manifold. It represents unity of the nation, cultural unity, interreligious unity of the nation, and also it is representative, it is a landmark in our struggle for democratic rights. So, Gandhi himself addressed the meeting at Chowpatty on the 6th of April. And Sarojini Naidu was also present. And similarly, in Calcutta, there were meetings and leading figures in Bengal were present. And in Delhi, Bihar, there is a remark which Rajendra Prasad makes about it in his autobiography. I will just read out to you what Rajendra Prasad says. The response to Gandhiji's call was phenomenal. His message, strangely enough, reached the four corners of the country, even though the Congress organization had not become so strong and widespread. On the appointed day, all work came to a standstill, and the country observed an unprecedented hartal. In all towns, all means of communications were suspended. Even in the countryside, the peasant put away his plough. Even in the countryside, the peasant put away his plough. This is 1919, when there is no internet, there is no television, newspapers are restricted, communication is restricted. And Rajan Babu writes, but before the Hartal, Gandhiji had made one stipulation. He wanted every satyagrahi to sign a pledge of non-violence and to agree to defy such laws as might be suggested by the Satyagraha Committee and to suffer gladly any punishment that such action might entail. So there was a discipline that Gandhiji taught from the Satyagrahas. And the civil disobedience that was contemplated was in the form of certain books, certain laws that were to be defied. Firstly, the laws under which certain books had been prohibited. The three books, the four books were prohibited, which were selected for sale on the 6th of April. These were, first was Hind Swaraj, Gandhiji's own. Then Gandhiji had made a summary of the trial of Socrates. That had been prohibited. And then Gandhiji's summary of Ruskin's unto this last. That had been prohibited. So these books were to be sold all over the country, and places were specified where these books would be available. So they were to be sold in defiance of authority. And then in addition, there was one other book that was to be sold. This had been published from South Africa by Gandhiji's press when he was in South Africa. This was the life and address of Mustafa Kemal Pasha. Now, this is not the Turkish figure. Mustafa Kemal Pasha was the Egyptian leader, a great Egyptian nationalist, who had died while Gandhiji was still in South Africa. And Gandhiji had been very impressed by his address given in Alexandria. And that speech had been published by him through his, it was serialized in Indian Opinion in South Africa and published separately as a booklet. So that booklet was also to be sold. Later, perhaps it was discovered that this particular booklet had not been banned in India. But these were the books that were selected for being sold in defiance of the law. And another thing that was suggested was that an unregistered paper called Satyagrahi be published. It could be handwritten or reproduced as a mimeograph or whatever. It was supposed to be only one side of a foolscap sheet. And that was to be replicated by hand or by whatever means, and it was to reach the masses of India. So these were the defiances that were sought on 6th April, and it had a great impact. Now, the significance of the choice of these books, the three books which Gandhiji himself had done, one of course was his own Hind Swaraj. The other two represented a vision of society. Ruskin's unto this last, and so, you know, the trial of Socrates, this representative of the strength to defy the state and to make the economic system relevant to the people. And finally, the last one, the life and address of Mustafa Kemal Pasha, the Egyptian leader. This was representative of the anti-imperialist struggle, because Mustafa Kemal Pasha had defied the British in Egypt, and he had therefore become a symbol of Egyptian national, a very great symbol of Egyptian nationalism and of Egyptian freedom from British rule. So to circulate this material was obviously a great act of defiance. Then he would refer to 6th April in his subsequent writings always as the day India awoke. The day India, even in the Northeast, there was Northeast, East, South, West, everywhere in India. So he said this was the day India awakened. And even 11 years later, when he started the salt satyagraha, he chose this date, 6th April, to defy the salt laws. Because in invoking this date, he was invoking the unity and strength and courage which 6th April 1919 had represented. The unity across communities, the courage to stand up against bullets. This is what he was invoking. And so it is no coincidence that the date he chooses 11 years later to defy the salt laws is actually 6th April. So that also happened on this very day. Now, let me come to another aspect of the massacre in Jallianwala Bagh. Now, when the massacre, the crowd gathered at Jallianwala Bagh for a meeting, they were protesting against three things. First, the intervening events had shown a great deal of solidarity. As in Delhi, the protest was held on 30th March. Similarly, in Amritsar also, there had been protests on 30th March and slightly earlier also, after Gandhiji's call. So as a result of these protests, Saifuddin Kichlu and Dr. Satyapal had been banned from making any public statements or attending any meetings, etc. And there was a great deal of anger at the restrictions imposed on Dr. Satyapal and Saifuddin Kichlu. And then on the 9th of April, when Gandhiji was proceeding towards Punjab, he was taken off the train at a station in Haryana called Palwal. And from Palwal, he was bodily taken off from the train from Palwal. And from Palwal, he was taken to Mathura, where he spent the night. And then he was taken to Savai Madhopur, en route to Bombay, all under guard. So he writes about it that he was actually under arrest. And in Bombay, he was released. So, but meanwhile, this news had also got around that Gandhiji has been arrested. So the protests that were taking place on 13th April, first of all, 10th April, there was a protest in Amritsar and in much of Punjab. And then again on 13th April, there was a collective protest on all the events that had occurred after the call for a hartal. Now, the administration had got a bit unnerved because of the Hindu-Muslim unity that had become Hindu-Muslim and Sikh unity that had become quite evident to everybody in the course of these protests, that all the communities are united, and the firing followed. Now, I need not go into too many details about the firing, but just about the figure. The official figure was that 379 people were killed. Now, the interesting thing is that this matter is studied by Rajaram, who produced a very detailed study from Patiala University. And in that study, he shows that actually counting did not start until August. That is, the counting of the deaths did not start until August. And taking the figures of the people killed from the Seva Samiti as well as the organizations involved in the burials, because there were Hindus and Muslims and Sikhs who were all killed there. So he collected these figures from these various organizations, and his assessment was that at least 1,000 people were killed. But this is now something that can never be ascertained, because entry into Punjab was banned after the 13th massacre on 13th April. So entry was not permissible until August. In August, it's after that that people start going there, lawyers start going there. Motilal Nehru makes a visit, Jawaharlal Nehru makes a visit. A committee is set up by the Congress. C.R. Das makes a visit. Gandhiji goes there, and so on. But this happens only after 2 months, more than the massacre took place on 13th April, and it's in August that people can start visiting Punjab. So you can imagine that even counting of the dead bodies the deaths does not start until August 1990. And even legal redress, lawyers from outside Punjab were not able to go. And it's only when Motilal Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru, Madan Mohan Malviya and others go there that, which is August and after, that some kind of legal redress starts taking place. And till then, it is only lawyers from Punjab who were allowed to do anything. And the lawyers from Punjab, of course, have been, they were in a state of funk, many of them, because they had been, all of Punjab had been terrorized. So this was the state of the, this is the position about the massacre itself. But then the important thing after the massacre is that martial law is proclaimed on the day after, that is 14th April. So on 13th April, when General Dyer does his shooting, there is actually no martial law. So he is acting, he's acting quite divorces any kind of even a legal cover of authority. Then after the proclamation of martial law on 14th April, there is aerial bombing in Gujranwala on that day, 14th April. Villages are bombed. And also on 15th April. So if you see the report that Gandhiji, C.R. Das, Motilal Nehru, K. Santanam, M.R. Jayakar, Abbas Syedji, and all those people who went to Punjab and studied this and gathered evidence on this matter. If you see their report, which was published in March 1920, very soon, two volumes. The second volume contains about 600 statements which they gathered personally. And each statement is signed by one member, but it's taken in the member's presence. So they were very meticulous, and they produced a report in quick time. And if you see the report, you see photographs of children who are maimed by this aeroplane bombing, which took place in Gujarat. You know, in fact, when this centenary for this event came, it would have been an excellent idea for for the countries of South Asia to observe the centenary jointly. It would have been a great move, but unfortunately, this was not something that was pursued by any of the governments at the time. Now, I want to come to the fact that, after these events had taken place, how did the freedom movement, how did the nationalists deal with it? Now, the point to remember here is, first, it was a state of shock. Then the feeling that, oh, this is an attack on all of us. And if this is how we are being treated, then we do not want to be ruled by this government, this power which is ruling over us. And that is what ultimately converts Gandhi ji into a rebel. Even more than the massacre itself, the reaction to the massacre in England, where the House of Lords actually praises General Dyer. So those are the sort of things which made public opinion in India very angry. And ultimately, the result of the massacre was, and the result of the massacre and the reaction to it in England, all the fating of General Dyer and the governor, O'Dyer. The governor also had a similar name, O'Dyer, Michael O'Dyer. So the reaction to all this was that the Raj lost whatever, the British Raj lost whatever legitimacy it had. And after this incident, it was on borrowed time. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is the kind of statements which were made by our leaders after this incident. This is what Maulana Azad said. The same thing which Gandhiji had said, that, the blood of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs mingled together at Jallianwala Bagh, and a new nation arose from there. You can't separate this blood. It's the blood of all communities that spilled. This is what Maulana Abul Kalam Azad said. Yahi zameen hai. I'll translate later for, it's a short statement, I'll translate later for some of the participants from the south. यही जमीन है जहां मौत के सुकून में हमारे नए कौमी संघर्ष का हंगामा बेदार किया था। हिंदुओं, मुसलमानों, सिखों का खून एक साथ और एक ही वक्त बहा, और इसी मौत के खून में से हमने अपने लिए जिंदगी का खून बहाम पहुंचाया। इतने साल गुजर गए, 13 अप्रैल की इस घटना की याद ने हमें यहाँ जमा कर दिया है और हर साल यहाँ जमा होते रहेंगे। मैं आज इसी सरजमीन पर, इसी महीने और इसी तारीख में हर हिंदू, मुसलमान और सिख से निवेदन करूंगा कि इस घटना की याद अपने दिल के एक एक रेशे के अंदर ताज़ा करें और फिर अपने विश्वास और अमल का हिसाब करके देखें कि इस घटना ने जिंदगी और हरकत का जो पैगाम हमें दिया था वह हमारे दिल और दिमाग पर अंकित है या मिट चुका है। This is so relevant today. I'll read the same thing in English because I think I have the English also somewhere. Yes. So this is the English text. Here lies the patch of land wherein stillness of death gave birth to the tremendous urge of our new national struggle. It is here that the blood of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs mingled together in common martyrdom and was converted into the lifeblood of the Indian nation. So many years have passed, and every year on the 13th of April, we assemble together to commemorate the event. On this very day of this month, I appeal to the Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs assembled together on this very spot to carefully examine their hearts and see if the urge for new life and dynamic action arising from Jallianwala Bagh is still fresh in their minds and on their hearts. This is Maulana. And there are other statements by Maulana Muhammad, the famous, one of the two Ali brothers, who was a key figure. The two brothers and their mother, Biamma, were key figures in the 1920s. Excuse me. This is his Maulana Muhammad Ali's speech at the Amritsar Congress held on 30th December 1919. And he says, I have today with my own eyes witnessed a scene the like of which I have never seen before. I see an enormous, I will not say an assembly, it looks like a mass meeting. To whom do we owe all this? Is it not to the great warrior who stopped shooting, not for mercy's sake, but when ammunition ran short? The man while he was coming from Rambagh, made up his mind to fire and fired strong. He has fired, now he's referring to General Dyer. He has fired not only on those people, but fired into our hearts. He has created a new fire. And out of that new fire, a nation of Hindus and Muslims is being created before you today. He has forged a new nation, a strong nation, a nation that will henceforth, God willing, fear God alone and no man on earth. So this was the statement made by Maulana Muhammad Ali. And this is the spirit in which this day, this April 6th, the Day of Awakening, April 13th, and the whole week, April 6th to 13th, was observed throughout the freedom movement. I just want to take you to a sample of the kind of observances. Now, I'm now talking of the afterlife of National Week. That is how after 1919 it came to be observed. So I'll just read out to you a few things. On 6th April 1920, that is on this day in 1920, Motilal Nehru issued a message for the observance of National Week. He said the 6th of April 1919 saw the first unmistakable demonstration of real national life in India. On that day, the millions of India awoke from their long slumber and participated in the great protest against the Rowlatt Act and all that lay behind that measure. It was almost a miracle. The rarest of occurrences in the lives of nations. It is but right that we should celebrate this great event in a fitting manner. This is Motilal Nehru. It was communists like Singaravelu in Madras, now Chennai. They participated actively in the National Week celebrations, and Singaravelu even spoke and chaired some meetings on this in the south. And then there was the Calcutta, Bihar National Week in 1920 was organized by Mazharul Haq, a great national figure who founded Sarakat Ashram, where Rajan Babu later went and lived and died. Rajan Babu died there. Mahatma Gandhi wrote, as I mentioned, on National Week in 1925. On 13th of April 1919, the nation was made to offer a sacrifice in which Hindu, Mussalman, and Sikh blood mingled at Jallianwala Bagh. Sarojini Naidu, she presided over a meeting in Bombay. There were reports of, in 1926, there were reports from Madras, Lahore, Nagpur about observances of National Week. Tribals in what is now Jharkhand observed National Week. It was a major event for them. They were known as the Tana Bhagats. They would come and attend sessions. They came for the Calcutta Congress in 1926. There was a monster public meeting at Jallianwala Bagh in 1928 to observe National Week. And there are so many such instances. I'm just taking you to a few of them. Some very interesting ones. Gandhiji on 5th April, that is on the eve of the on the eve of breaking the salt law on 6th April. He says this on 5th April. The 6th April has been to us since its culmination in Jallianwala Bagh massacre, a day for penance and purification. We therefore commence it with prayer and fasting. I hope the whole of India will observe the National Week commencing from tomorrow in the spirit in which it was conceived. I am positive that the greater the dedication to the country's cause and the greater the purification, the speedier will be the glorious end for which millions of India consciously or unconsciously are striving. In Jamia Millia Islamia, in educational institutions which were set up as a result of the national movement, the non-cooperation movement and so on, Jallianwala Bagh and this entire National Week used to be observed as Qawmi Hafta, that is Urdu for National Week. And it was a focus on constructive work, promoting Khadi. In Jamia, the staff, the teaching staff would take over the class 4 staff, the duties of class 4 staff, speaking and so on. Then there was this observance of National Week in Orissa, in Kanpur, in I've already mentioned Calcutta, Deshbandhu Park. Indra Narayan Sen Gupta, General Secretary of the Bengal Congress Nationalist Party, was sentenced to 2 years rigorous imprisonment for sedition. The charge was in connection with the speech he delivered at a public meeting in Deshbandhu Park, Calcutta. So the interesting thing thereafter is that it's not confined to Hindu, Muslim, Sikhs. Violet Alva from Karnataka, she was vice president of the Nationalist Christian Party. And in 1943, she staged a demonstration at the Chowpatty Sands on 11th April 1943 on the occasion of Women's Day of the National Week. And it was observed not just in India, it was observed elsewhere as well. So in Singapore, it is observed, the National Week was observed by Indians abroad in Singapore in 1943. In 1940 especially, the government came down very heavily on those who were observing National Week in India. Because National Week, the Muslim League passed its resolution, Pakistan resolution in March 1940. And National Week came immediately after that. So National Week was a threat because National Week represented the unity of the communities. So National Week was a threat to the colonial administration. So they came down very heavily. Senapati Bapat was prosecuted at the behest of the Bombay government on a sedition charge for addressing a gathering during National Week on 6th April 1940. So this is what was going on. And Subhash Bose was very active in 1940 in observing National Week. H.V. Kamath was asked by Subhash Bose in April 1940 to organize the war protests on April 6, the first day of National Week. The Kisan Sabha and the Forward Bloc decided that in March 1940, that on 6th April, the first day of National Week, agitation to be started, calling upon the people not to help in the imperialist war. So, the administration started reacting very strongly against the observance of National Week in 1940, because they took that as a threat to the divide and rule policy that the administration was pursuing. Gandhiji talks about the unexpected and spontaneous manifestation of villagers all over India in April 1919, and talks of the origin of National Week to the press in 1945 and so on. So then another feature of National Week was the fact that Dalits, Harijans as they were called, were taken to wells by public workers. They come join us. And for instance, 6th April 1949, it is proposed to have an intensive drive against untouchability and other social disabilities under which Harijans are suffering in various villages. So it was a major use made of National Week was to bring about social equality, to bring about social unity across the communities and so on. And this continued after independence. But gradually, I suppose two things happened. One is that our unity, our secularism, our humanism, they came to be taken for granted. So the message of National Week, it had so much sunk in into the country that National Week itself stopped being observed. So people just forgot, gradually it faded from memory. But it continues in the laws. For instance, the flag code still refers to the National Week. It refers to Independence Day, Republic Day, and it refers to National Week, April 6th to 13th. You can Google and look for it. So I've sent some of you the references in the flag code. So this thing, and then also I think there were.
Anand, you need to conclude.
I'm about to conclude. Should I conclude now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I was coming to the ideological basis for forgetting, because to some extent there is a ideological basis also for forgetting. 6th April, today's date, since it was the first and largest protest on a democratic rights issue, first and largest all India protest on a democratic rights issue in the thousands of years of the history of Indian civilization. It is something which we would have expected our democratic rights groups and our political parties, all of them to remember. But the thing is that a sectarian element unconsciously enters into all of us. That is, you say, oh, this is something Gandhi did. I don't like Gandhi. I will not accept him. But this is something the Congress did. Or this is something associated with. Now, the important thing about National Week is that Gandhi, Subhash Bose, Jawaharlal Nehru, Motilal Nehru, Maulana Azad, Maulana Muhammad Ali, Sarojini Naidu, Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay, they're all associated with it. And it is, it's a week that represents the unity of Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, as you saw, Violet Alva also taking active part and being arrested in 1943. And Dalits, the whole question of untouchability is brought to the forefront in the national scene. And not only that, the question of your commitment to the abolition of untouchability is made a precondition for your participating in the Satyagraha. That if you do not commit yourself to the abolition of untouchability, if you do not commit yourself to the abolition, if you do not commit yourself to Hindu-Muslim unity, which includes Hindu Sikh, Hindu Parsi, Hindu Christian unity, which Gandhi said so many times, if you do not commit yourself to these things, you do not qualify as a Satyagrahi. And it is this that repeatedly, people say that Bardoli civil disobedience movement was called off in February 1922 after Chauri Chaura. The fact is, Bardoli had been postponed many times earlier. It was due in November. The civil disobedience movement in Bardoli was due in November 1921. Gandhiji postponed it because he said, "You are not ready. You are not committed. You have not yet shown that you are committed to Hindu-Muslim unity, to eradication of untouchability. That you are not committed to national education. Your schools, you're not taking, Dalits are not coming, sitting with your kids in school. It is your duty. If they don't come, you have to go to them, bring them to your schools. Until you do all this, I will not start civil disobedience." And he repeatedly postponed civil disobedience, even earlier, before Chauri Chaura. All because he says that these are preconditions. Unless you maintain non-violence, until you maintain the discipline of Satyagraha, I will not start civil disobedience. So this is the important lesson to observe this on this National Week and National Day of Awakening, and that we need to rekindle that commitment to the values of our freedom movement and to remember those values which are increasingly being forgotten. I don't think I've skipped any major point, except that I do want to emphasize that one of the one thing that I feel ashamed about is that institution close to where I live. I'm in Delhi. This is a few miles from me in Haryana. In Ballabgarh, there was a hospital named after Badshah Khan who was arrested and imprisoned in 1919 in his agitation against the Rahul attack on this day of awakening. He and his father was also arrested. The father was 90 years old, Behram Khan. He was also arrested in this agitation. And the hospital named after Badshah Khan has been sought to be renamed after a political figure belonging to a particular political party, a political figure who was not even alive, who was not even born in 1919. He was born 5 years after that. And but the hospital is sought to be named after him. It is a shame for all of us, I think. And if we can't protect even these monuments to our freedom movement, then this is the way memory is erased from the minds of the people. And we have to rekindle these memories, rekindle the light, and bring these things before the people. And that is really the message of National Week. And we need to keep doing this year after year, year after year. And of course, we have to reinvigorate our activities throughout the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very illuminating presentation. You've gone into the detailed history. I would request if Anand Kumarji is on here, I can't see him, but would you like to say a few words in conclusion? Anand Kumarji? I've scanned, I have not seen that. But basically, if one was to shorten the whole speech, the essence of the speech was that most of the people who fought for freedom, they were warriors of trying to get this religious discrimination out, the unity on both the religious front, the caste front, and the women were supported. So this is something which we are very farly diverging from. And I think the essence, correct me if I'm wrong, Anilji, your essence of the whole thing to be put into one sentence would be that we got to learn from the freedom struggle and the importance of unity across all kinds of religions, castes, and creed. Anilji there?
Yes, I would say yes, that hate has to be eradicated.
Thank you. Anybody would like to ask any questions right now? I don't know if there's anything in the chat box. I've not seen that. Oh, there are 25 chat boxes. I wanted to ask you a question before I go through the chat box. What is it that motivated the people then to be able to, to kind of come across and cut across all these differences, whereas today we are unable to mobilize the same people for the same cause? I mean, leadership apart, I mean, there's something intrinsic that people must have had, which has made them come forward, which today they are reluctant to do. Could you advise on that?
You're asking me? Are you
Anilji.
To me?
Yeah, Anil.
All right, I'll attempt an answer. And I think the answer was given. Can you see me? Can you see what's, yeah. I will attempt an answer. It's not my answer really. It is Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's answer. In 1934, there was an AICC session in Bombay. And there was a great debate in the AICC session, Bombay session, about the place of constructive work in the struggle. People used to say, well, how can constructive work bring independence and so on. And there was another group which said, well, constructive work is important. Now, Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan spoke at this session. It was a short speech. It is in Urdu, but I'll tell you what he said. He said that he had just made a tour of Bengal. And he went to many subdivisions in Bengal. And he found that wherever the constructive program, that is in this case the Khadi program, the village subdivisions where the Khadi program had reached, and people were able to generate some kind of income, at least for one meal a day. So there the people would come and listen to us. That is, the Congress meetings would be attended where the constructive program had reached. But where the Khadi program had not reached, people would not come to us. वो हमसे कतराते थे. Those are his words in the 1934 session. That लोग हमारे पास आने से कतराते थे. In those subdivisions where the constructive work program of the Congress had not reached. So he made the point that your constructive work program is intrinsically related to the struggle, to the national struggle, because it is where you are able to show through your constructive program a living evidence of your sincerity to the people. There the people will come to you. Now what happened was that after independence, there was a feeling that, well, now the state is in our control and the state will do the things that we were doing through the constructive work program. So there was a sort of benign neglect of the constructive work program. And in 1969, when the Congress split, this became a malign neglect, because when the Congress split, the faction, the Congress O represented the Congress organization mostly, while Indira Gandhi's faction represented the parliamentary party mostly. So the organization went with the Congress O initially, and all the constructive work institutions of the Congress, which were related to the Congress tradition, they were not formally part of the Congress, but they related to the Congress tradition of the freedom movement. These constructive work institutions were linked with the organizational side. So they had closer ties with the organizational side. So Indira Gandhi's faction of the party got cut off from the constructive work activities on the ground. So
would it be fair?
That the result was that it went into a secular decline, which by secular decline, I mean a statistical decline over time, which is not contradicted even by the 1971-72 victories which Indira Gandhi secured, because that didn't do away with the basic defect that it had her fraction of the Congress, the side of the party, had lost that grassroots connect which the constructive work institutions had, which were closer to the other faction of the Congress, which went with the organizational side, the Congress over, which split in 1969.
Amma,
Yeah. So therefore, the answer to your question is, if you want to rekindle that, you really have to rekindle those constructive work activities, which will give support to a secular, pluralistic, humanistic structure, institution, or entity at the larger national level.
Thanks. So essentially what you're saying, the learning out of this whole thing is that if we want this communal harmony and social harmony and things, we need to identify and do constructive work at block level for us to be able to mobilize people against the current distraction.
We or someone else does it with whom we are closely.
Yeah. We is not society, but as India. Thank you. Any other questions anybody has? Shashi ji?
So, there is a question by Ansar Ali Sahab. Please read. There is a question. How to inculcate the values of National Week in the youth in this consumer society? There is a question from Anil Nauriya Sahab. That is written in the chat box.
It's actually the previous question which I answered was intended. I think it deals with that question also. So I need not repeat the answer. It is. I think everyone should read Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan's speech in the Bombay Congress in 1934. It's a 2-3 page speech, very short, very simple, and I think the answers are there.
Well, Gautam ji, how much time do we have? Or we have already, I know we have overshot the time that you had initially indicated.
Yes, we have 10 minutes time. Meanwhile, we can invite our respected participant like Prem Singh ji and Shashi Sekhar ji to be today's discussant.
Please.
Yes. Raji Ahmed bhai from UP, he also joined. So Prem Singh ji.
Gautam,
Ji.
fine with me, no query.
जी.
हमारे प्रिय साथी रियाज साहब भी हैं। रियाज साहब कुछ कहें? रियाज साहब हैं?
जी है तो
मैं सुन रहा हूं सर
जी। कुछ तो कहें, ये कौमी हफ्ता पे कुछ अपनी बात तो कहें।
Well, I guess if no one has any questions, then I
have some questions. Can I put some questions?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
As a quiz, how many of the participants who are here today knew that there was bombing from the air in India, in Gujranwala in 1990? That's the first question. How many knew that there was bombing by air in Gujranwala in 1990?
Yes, that's it.
1990, you're saying?
1919.
1919.
We are talking about 1919.
We
Yes.
did not know, but by who
14th April 1919, 15th April 1919, there was bombing by aeroplanes in Gujranwala.
By the British?
Yes, by the British.
Oh my God. Even we are not aware?
Ah. So you need to read the report which was produced by Abbas Sayyidji and Gandhiji on martial law in Punjab in 1920. That is martial law in 1919, but the report came in 1920, where you find out all this.
That's a very important thing.
Okay, I have another.
I'll be back in 5 minutes. I'm on a conference call.
राव साहब आप म्यूट हो गए. Please kindly unmute yourself.
No,
I have
this,
another
in
question.
Gujranwala,
I have a
Bombay,
second question.
what was the reason for that? Because there was not much of a crowd there, from what you told.
So there was protest all over Punjab. So they were trying to terrorize Punjab. They had declared martial law in Punjab on 14th April, and on that very day they bombed Gujranwala, and and the next day also they bombed Gujranwala, and a school in Gujranwala was also bombed.
Oh no.
School in the countryside. I have another question.
Yes.
How many of the participants today know that National Week, April 6 to April 13, is mentioned in the Flag Code of India?
In the?
Flag Code of India.
Really?
Yeah. National Week, April 6 to 13 is mentioned in the Flag Code of India. How many participants know this?
That's the news. I hope today we all are failing in replying your questions.
That is the task of great historian.
So please let us know.
I've already sent you the link to the National Flag Code of India. You have to see your email.
Okay.
Please check your emails. I have sent you the link.
Yes.
I've
please.
also told you the paragraphs where it is mentioned.
Yes. That's the news. We have to learn a lot about this Qawmi Hafta and everything so that we can reach to the youth.
Okay, third question. How many of you know that when Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan was arrested in the struggle against the Rawalpindi attack, that his father was also arrested? And his father's name was Behram Khan, and the father was 90 years old when Behram Khan was arrested in the struggle against the Rawalpindi attack. That is, the struggle took place on this very day, April 6th, and Behram Khan was also arrested. So how many of the participants know this?
You have just referred to this in your speech?
Yes.
Earlier, you referred to this.
Yes. But I wanted to know how many knew this earlier.
Yes.
Not knowing before. Not knowing before.
Which we need to collate and disperse to people, because we don't have many facts that most people know. Well, with these words, I think we should close the session. If no one has any other questions, I want to thank Anil for an outstanding presentation and giving us a lot of facts and food to chew on. A lot of thought process involved in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
राव साहब,
हाँ जी,
ये कल की सूचना भी अगर अभी दे दें, रणधीर अगर वो कल के कार्यक्रम की सूचना दे दें यहाँ, so everybody will be aware of tomorrow's program.
शशि बोल दीजिए, आप इसको अनाउंस कर दीजिए कल का.
रणधीर जी प्लीज.
जी, कल का शायद 1 मिनट जिसमें
उन्होंने प्रोग्राम दे तो रखा है आनंद
जी. कल का टॉक हमारा प्रोफेसर अजीत झा जी के साथ होगा और उसमें फैसल जी जो है वो चेयर करेंगे सेशन. उसमें जो टॉपिक है हमारे कल के टॉक का, वे टू नेशन बिल्डिंग इन इंडिया. तो इफ्तार पार्टी की वजह से हमारे कुछ मित्र जुड़ नहीं पा रहे हैं इस वक्त, तो हम कोशिश करेंगे कि थोड़ा सा 7 से 8 या फिर 7:30 से 8 हम अभी फाइनलाइज नहीं किए हैं, तो 7:30 से 8:30 कल का सेशन होगा. उसके बाद 8 अप्रैल को शहीद आजम भगत सिंह के जो भतीजे हैं प्रोफेसर जगमोहन सिंह के द्वारा वो मीडिया एंड कम्युनलिज्म के ऊपर हमारा टॉक होगा। और जो हमारा 9 तारीख का टॉक है। 8 तारीख का जो हमारा टॉक है वो भगत सिंह का कम्युनलिज्म को लेके किस तरह की अंडरस्टैंडिंग रही है उसके ऊपर 8 तारीख का टॉक होगा। 10 तारीख का टॉक जिसमें प्रोफेसर आनंद कुमार बोलेंगे गांधीयन वे ऑफ नेशन बिल्डिंग का। और 13 को एक शाम शहीदों के नाम, जिस तरह का हमारा 26 जनवरी का सेशन हुआ था उसी तरह का एक काव्य गोष्ठी होगी जिसमें हम शहीदों को के समर्पित कुछ काव्य गोष्ठी हम करेंगे। और 14 अप्रैल को हमारा आखिरी प्रोग्राम होगा जिसमें हम डॉक्टर भीमराव अंबेडकर को याद करेंगे, उनके कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन बनाने से लेके और सोशल रिफॉर्म लाने तक की में उनकी जो भूमिका रही है उनको हम याद करेंगे। तो यूजुअली 6 से लेके 13 तक का हमारा सेशन था, एक दिन हमने ऐड ऑन कर दिया जिसमें भीमराव अंबेडकर को हम याद करेंगे।
नहीं तो ये कल का जो प्रोग्राम है आप सारे साथ कर रहे हैं, क्या करिए, क्योंकि वो इफ्तार के कारण ये प्रॉब्लम